Greetings, vinyl community. This is the second week in April. Mr. Rick back again to show a few more record albums. This week I thought instead of going with the country, we'd stop and take a look at a few of the old popular albums. These albums, when I was growing up, you couldn't get away from this music. It was played everywhere. It was played in the grocery stores, played in the dentist's office, and Tony Bennett and Frank Sinatra seemed to be playing everywhere when I was a boy. So these are a few of the albums that were popular back when. I'd like to start off with jazz fans. If most of you are familiar with this album, this was 1959. Dave Brubeck and his quartet, and Time Out is the name of this album. It's a good album. It's got the Take 5 on it, which was a big hit for him back in the day, and also Blue Rondo a la Turk, which was also one of his hits, and a good jazz album too. The Dave Brubeck Quartet, Time Out. The Andrews Sisters came out in 1937, and during the war years in the 1940s, they were probably, if not the most popular vocal group around. Of course, they recorded with Bing Crosby, and they were real popular, and then around 1950 they broke up. I don't know if they got tired of one another or tired of the business, but they stopped recording, and they took a break from one another. And then around 1960-61 they went to work for the Dot Record Company, and they re-recorded their old hits. Now, stereophonic sound had come along, and the quality of recording was so much better. And so when they went to work for Dot, they re-recorded all their greatest hits, and they made those things swing like nobody's business. They were just great redone. A nice crisp band, and they just sounded wonderful. And that's what this album is. This is a compilation of all those old Dot recordings from the early 1960s. And in 1970s, I had this album on an 8-track tape into my car, and I must have wore that thing slam out, because every time I got in it, I was listening to it for the longest time. In the Mood is just a great album of their old hits that were re-recorded, and they swing like crazy, and it's a good, crisp sound also. But the recording itself is very good. So if you're an Andrews Sisters fan, or you want to hear some good swing music, this is a good album to get. In the Mood by the Andrews Sisters. Belafonte at Carnegie Hall, I grew up with this album. My father had a copy of this album. And one thing I will tell you, that if you're in a mediocre or a bad mood, you put this album on, by the end of the album you'll be in a good mood. Because the way that he presents his concert at Carnegie Hall, and by the end of it, he's teasing with the audience, and it's actually funny, some of the things he does with the audience on the tune Matilda. This is a good concert. It's for a live program. The quality of it was very good, and this one is a reissue, but it's a living stereo album, and it's a good quality sound. So if Belafonte fans, this is an excellent concert and a good effort from him. Here's another guy that's great in his day, Tony Bennett. And he's still alive today, but Tony Bennett fought in World War II, believe it or not. And he got his break in 1951 when he recorded Cold Cold Heart for Mitch Miller, who was at that time his producer. This is a good album of his early hits, and for some reason I find that artists, when they record their early hits, they're trying a lot harder, and they're putting more into it, and the early hits to me are always the best. This one's got Stranger Paradise, Because of You, Rags to Riches, and The Boulevard of Broken Dreams, and so many others. And it's a good listen of early Tony Bennett's early recordings there. That album from 1958. There's a gentleman up in West Virginia. His name is Oddbox Topper, and I look at him and I watch his videos because he's a record collector also. And Oddbox likes to go out and he'll buy a record just because he likes the artwork on the album, not necessarily because he wants to hear it. And he's got me doing that also. I was in a shop not long ago. I'm not a big Boston Pops fan. I do enjoy listening to it, but I don't collect them. But I was in a shop and they had a big collection of Boston Pops with Arthur Fiedler, most of them from the 50s, and the artwork on these albums is so spectacular that I picked up half the collection. Let me show you a couple of them. This one, I like this one a lot. This is Pop Stoppers. I think that's from 1958. Here's one that came out in the early... Stereophonic Sound came out in 1958, and this is kind of a joke to me, because that's what he's doing. He's Arthur Fiedler, and he's got his stereo components all here to let you know that this is Stereophonic Sound, and it's kind of a neat joke. This one is a Russian Caviar. It's a Russian composer, and I like the look of that one also. Here's his Christmas album from 1959. I like the way she looks, and all the instruments in the bag and everything. And this is one that the Rhapsody in Blue. I like the look of the piano and the woman in her jumpsuit there. And here is the Hearts in Heaven, just the two people waltzing, but that caught my eye also. And here's another one. This is from the $1 Million Movies, but I like the way that that's a nice album cover also. So, Boston Pops. Ray Charles, in 1962 or 63, I'm not sure exactly what year it was, but he put out an album titled Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music. Ray Charles is one of the few people, besides Linda Ronstadt, that has had hits in each of 4 categories. Of course, he started out in rhythm and blues, then he bled over into rock and roll, and he had hits in the rock and roll field. Then he put out this album in the early 60s, and this made a big pop splash. I Can't Stop Loving You, I think, was the big hit on it. And then, after that, he went over to the country western field, and he had hits with Hank Williams Jr. and Willie Nelson. So I have a lot of respect for Ray Charles and Linda Ronstadt. She also did that type of thing in several fields. But this album here is a very good album, Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music. If you find a copy of that, pick it up. It's good listen. Connie Francis, Who's Sorry Now? This was her first album from 1958. Who's Sorry Now was a hit way back in the 1920s, believe it or not. And Connie Francis had been recording for MGM, but she hadn't had anything that would hit. And they weren't picking her up at this time, and this was her last chance with MGM before she got dropped. Her father came up with this tune, Who's Sorry Now? She didn't like the song, did not want to record it, but her father made her record it, and that was her first #1, and that's the one that got her. This is a good listen to. Early Connie Francis, if you like Connie Francis. Here's another good one, Judy Garland. I love Judy Garland's music. When MGM let her go in the early 50s, Capitol Records scoffed her up and picked her up, and she began recording with him a lot of artists. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, several artists were coming over to Capitol at that time, and she did too. And she put out some great music. Judy Garland could belt out a song like nobody else, and this is a good album. This is her album alone, and it's got a lot of her hits on it. Little Girl Blue, By Myself, Among My Souvenirs, to name a few. And I'm looking for a better copy of this album. This album is not in the best of shape, but it's listenable, and I enjoy it. Judy Garland is a great listen. Here's another guy that everybody knows who Jackie Gleason was, with the Honeymooners, and he did the movie with Burt. I can't remember Burt's last name right now, but Jackie Gleason in the early 50s came out with a series of albums. This one's from 1954. It's a reissue, of course. They didn't have stereo in 1954, but this is a reissue. But it's his sound was so good with the orchestra. They were all orchestra albums, but Jackie Gleason had somebody playing a trumpet in his albums that took the lead on all the songs, and it's just, if you just want something to relax with, these albums will do that for you. It's got a little bit of a jazz tint to an orchestra, and they're really great albums. They really are. And this one especially, I think, is one of his best. One of the first ones that he came out with. Music, Memories, and Martinis. Or Music, Martinis, and Memories. Last but not least, I've got something I'm kind of proud of that I want to show you. LPs came out in 1954, 12-inch LPs. The original LP came out in 1948, but it was 10-inch. In 1954, late, they decided to go ahead and expand it to 12-inch. This is the RCA Victor album, and the reason why I know it's the RCA Victor is because of the label. These are original. This is what the RCA Victor originally looked like when they first came out. These are Glenn Miller's albums, or his recordings that were live. They released a bunch of these live recordings in '54 and put out this limited edition. Of course, in '54, Glenn Miller still had a big following. People were still buying his records. And they produced this. And then 2 years later, they produced the second volume in 1956. And that's when RCA Victor changed the label to the big dog in the black background there. But these are albums that you don't see very often. You certainly won't see them. If you ever see one of these in a record shop or a junk shop for a little price, lop them up, because they're really fairly rare, and I don't know how many of them are out there. But they're good recordings also if you can get into Glenn Miller and the big band. Okay, so that's I'm immensely proud of these two collections. And it looks like the clock has done caught us again. Oh, I wanted to tell you a story before I did that. I was in a record shop not long ago, and I was pawing through some crates, some records, and a guy came up beside me, and he started looking through some of the albums. And his wife walked up behind him, and she said, "Walk away, walk away." And he said, "But dear, there might be a gem in here somewhere." She said, "Walk away, walk away." And he picked up an album. He said, "Yeah, look, but here's Boxcar Willie." And she looked at him again, and she said, "Walk away, walk away." And so he put the record back and walked away. But it was kind of cute. I guess you had to be there. But I've often wished I had somebody that would tell me to walk away every once in a while. Well, it looks like the clock has done caught us again, and it's time for us to get our satchel and go. We'll be back before long, though. I want you to keep looking for us, if you will. And if you like this little program, drop us a little comment down in the comments section. Maybe there's an artist or an album that you'd like to hear about or see that I can help you out with, and I'd be more than happy to include one of those in the near future. Until we meet you again, this is Mr. Rick saying that if the good Lord's willing and the creeks don't rise, we'll see you for long.